What happens when Hollywood's most beloved actor meets late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Pedro Pascal sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. This isn't your typical celebrity chat. This is a masterclass in how a simple conversation can spiral into television chaos that has the entire entertainment industry talking. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other. The studio audience was buzzing with anticipation as Pedro Pascal, fresh off his latest streaming success, walked onto the set with his trademark warm smile. The man who had captured hearts as Din Djarin in The Mandalorian and Joel Miller in The Last of Us seemed relaxed, waving to the crowd as the applause thundered through the studio. But what began as a typical late-night appearance would soon devolve into one of the most shocking confrontations in recent television history. The interview kicked off smoothly enough. Kimmel, sporting his usual smirk, welcomed Pascal with the kind of theatrical enthusiasm that had become his signature. "Pedro Pascal, everybody, the man who can make us cry whether he's wearing a helmet or fighting zombies," Kimmel announced, gesturing dramatically toward his guest. The audience erupted in cheers, completely unaware that they were about to witness something that would dominate social media for days. Pascal settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket with the easy confidence of someone who had done this dance dozens of times before. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Always a pleasure," he said, his Chilean accent adding warmth to the words. But there was something in Kimmel's expression, a glint that suggested tonight wouldn't be business as usual. "So, Pedro, let's talk about your latest project," Kimmel began, leaning forward with an intensity that seemed oddly misplaced for what should have been light promotional banter. "You've been pretty vocal lately about certain political issues. Some might say you've been using your platform to push some pretty heavy agendas." The shift in tone was subtle, but unmistakable. Pascal's smile flickered slightly, his posture straightening as he processed the unexpected direction. "I think using the word agenda is a bit loaded, don't you think? I've simply been speaking about things I care about. Human rights, equality, basic decency." Kimmel's laugh had an edge to it that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Right, right. But some people are saying that celebrities should stick to entertaining and leave the politics to the politicians. What do you say to those people?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Pascal's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "I'd say that's a convenient way to tell people to shut up when they don't like what they're hearing. Since when is caring about other human beings considered political? Well, when you're talking about immigration policies, gun control, LGBTQ rights, these are divisive topics, Pedro. Not everyone in your audience agrees with your perspectives." Kimmel's emphasis on the word perspectives dripped with condescension. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Pascal leaned back in his chair, his famous warmth replaced by something cooler, more calculated. "Divisive to whom exactly? Caring about immigrants is divisive? Supporting people's right to exist authentically is divisive? Or is it only divisive when it makes certain people uncomfortable?" Kimmel waved his hand dismissively, that familiar smirk growing wider. "Look, I'm just saying what a lot of people are thinking. You come from Chile, you've got this whole immigrant story, and now you're lecturing Americans about how they should think about immigration. Some folks might find that a little presumptuous." The words hit the studio like a physical blow. You could literally hear the audience's collective intake of breath. Pascal's eyes flashed with something dangerous, but he kept his voice level. "Presumptuous? I became an American citizen. I've lived here for decades. This is my country too. Jimmy." Sure it is," Kimmel replied, his tone suggesting anything but agreement. "But you've got to admit, there's something rich about someone who benefits from Hollywood's liberal bubble, telling working-class Americans they're wrong about border security." The mask was off now. What had started as a promotional interview had transformed into something else entirely. A confrontation that would define both men's careers in ways neither could have anticipated. Pascal's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white with tension, while Kimmel leaned back with the satisfied expression of someone who had just lit a fuse and was waiting for the explosion. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would shock even the most seasoned television viewers and leave everyone asking one question. How did a simple late-night interview turn into the most controversial moment in recent television history? The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence as Pascal processed what had just been said. The cameras captured every micro-expression crossing his face. The initial shock, the dawning realization that this wasn't going to be a typical promotional appearance, and finally something that looked dangerously close to fury. When he spoke, again, his voice carried a steel that fans had never heard from the usually gentle actor. "Let me get this straight, Jimmy. You invited me on your show to promote my work, and instead you're questioning my right to have opinions about the country. I call home?" Pascal's tone was measured, but there was fire beneath the surface. "You're suggesting that because I wasn't born here, my voice matters less?" Kimmel leaned forward, clearly energized by the escalation. "I'm not saying your voice matters less. I'm saying maybe you should consider that your privileged position in Hollywood might give you a skewed perspective on what regular Americans are dealing with." "Privileged position?" Pascal's eyebrows shot up. "You mean the privilege of working multiple jobs to support my family while auditioning for years? The privilege of being told I was too ethnic for certain roles? The privilege of watching my father flee a dictatorship and rebuild his life from nothing?" The audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something historic. Even Kimmel's usual supporters seemed uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. But the host doubled down, his smile becoming more predatory. "Look, Pedro, I respect your family's story, I really do. But you've got to see the irony here. You're sitting in a multi-million-dollar Hollywood studio. You're probably making more money per episode than most Americans make in a decade, and you're lecturing them about immigration policy. Can you see how that might rub people the wrong way?" Pascal's composure finally cracked. He leaned forward in his chair, his voice rising for the first time. "You think money changes the fundamental human experience? You think success erases where you come from or what you've seen? My family didn't choose to leave Chile for vacation, Jimmy. They left because staying meant death. And America welcomed you with open arms," Kimmel shot back. "Gave you opportunities you never would have had anywhere else. And now you're criticizing the very system that made your success possible." "I'm criticizing the parts of the system that are broken." Pascal's voice echoed through the studio. "That's what patriots do. They work to make their country better, not pretend everything is perfect." Kimmel's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "Patriots? That's interesting coming from someone who spent years bad-mouthing American foreign policy in Latin America. Some might question where your real loyalties lie." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Pascal's face went through a transformation that was visible to everyone in the studio. The warmth that had made him America's dad completely disappeared, replaced by something cold and dangerous. "Are you questioning my loyalty to this country?" Pascal's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "Are you suggesting I'm what? Some kind of foreign agent? A traitor?" Kimmel held up his hands in mock surrender, but his grin never wavered. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that when someone consistently criticizes American policies, especially regarding their home region, people might wonder about divided loyalties. It's a fair question." "A fair question?" Pascal stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. The sudden movement caused several audience members to gasp. "You just accused me of treason on national television, and you're calling it a fair question?" The studio erupted in murmurs and shocked whispers. Camera operators adjusted their angles, sensing they were capturing television gold. Kimmel, rather than backing down, seemed to feed off the chaos he had created. "I accused you of nothing. Pedro, I'm just reflecting what some Americans are thinking. You can't expect to be immune from criticism just because you're famous." Pascal's hands were shaking now. Whether from rage or adrenaline, it was impossible to tell. "Criticism? You're not criticizing my work or my opinions. You're questioning my fundamental right to be here, to speak, to exist as an American. This isn't criticism. This is nativism wrapped in a smile." "Now you're being dramatic," Kimmel said, his tone dismissive. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You turn everything into some grand moral crusade. Maybe if you spent less time virtue signaling and more time entertaining, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The phrase virtue signaling seemed to be the final straw. Pascal's entire body tensed, and for a moment it looked like he might physically lunge at the host. Instead, he took a step back, his chest heaving as he fought to control himself. "Virtue. Signaling?" he repeated slowly, his accent thickening with emotion. "So caring about other human beings is virtue signaling now? Standing up for people who can't defend themselves is virtue signaling?" The confrontation had reached a point where there was no going back. Both men stared at each other across the desk, the air between them crackling with tension. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply flee. But this was far from over. The real explosion was still to come. Kimmel, sensing he had pushed Pascal to the breaking point, decided to twist the knife deeper. "You know what, Pedro? Maybe this is good. Maybe it's time someone said what everyone's been thinking. You Hollywood types live in this bubble where you think your opinions matter more than everyone else's." Pascal's eyes narrowed to slits. "My opinions? You mean my belief that children shouldn't be separated from their parents at the border? My belief that people shouldn't be murdered for who they love? Those opinions?" "There you go again," Kimmel said, spreading his hands theatrically. "Everything's life and death with you people. Everything's a humanitarian crisis. Maybe if you actually lived in the real world instead of your gated communities, you'd understand that these issues are more complicated than your Twitter posts suggest." The phrase, "you people," hit the studio like a slap. Several audience members audibly gasped, and even some of Kimmel's staff behind the cameras exchanged alarmed looks. Pascal's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and then something much darker. "You people?" Pascal's voice was dangerously quiet. "What exactly do you mean by you people, Jimmy?" Kimmel realized he had stepped over a line, but instead of backing down, he doubled down with the recklessness of someone who had already committed to destruction. "You know exactly what I mean. The Hollywood elite, the virtue signalers, the people who lecture us from their ivory towers." "No, I don't think that's what you meant at all," Pascal said, taking a step closer to the desk. "I think you meant something else entirely. Something about immigrants. Something about people who look like me, sound like me." The accusation hung in the air like a loaded gun. Kimmel's face flushed red. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was impossible to tell. "Don't you dare try to make this about race. This is about your politics, not your ethnicity." "Is it?" Pascal's voice rose again, all pretense of control abandoned. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're telling me to know my place. Stay quiet. Be grateful. Don't get too uppity. Isn't that right, Jimmy?" The studio was in complete chaos now. Some audience members were standing, others were pulling out their phones to record, and the production crew was frantically trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial. But Kimmel wasn't done destroying his career. "You want to play the victim? Fine. But don't expect me to apologize for asking tough questions. This is my show, and I'll ask whatever I want." "Tough questions?" Pascal laughed bitterly. "You call questioning my loyalty to my own country a tough question? You call suggesting I'm some kind of foreign infiltrator journalism? Kimmel stood up now too, matching Pascal's energy. I never said you were a foreign infiltrator. You're putting words in my mouth. Am I? Pascal stepped around the desk, closing the distance between them. Because it sure sounded like you were suggesting my opinions don't count because I wasn't born here. It sure sounded like you were saying I should be grateful and quiet. The two men were now face to face, separated by barely 2 feet. The cameras captured every moment of the standoff, and you could practically feel the electricity in the air. Kimmel, perhaps realizing how bad this looked, tried to regain control. Look, Pedro, I think we're both getting a little heated here. Maybe we should— No! Pascal cut him off sharply. You don't get to do that. You don't get to attack me, question my patriotism, and then try to smooth it over when you realize how it looks. Kimmel's facade finally cracked completely. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I am questioning whether someone who constantly criticizes this country really belongs here. Maybe I am wondering why you don't just go back to Chile if America is so terrible. The words dropped like a bomb. The entire studio fell into a silence so complete you could hear the hum of the electrical equipment. Pascal stood frozen for a moment, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. There it is. The mask comes off. Go back where you came from. How original, Jimmy. How very American of you. Kimmel realized he had gone too far, but it was too late. The damage was done, captured on live television for millions to see. Pedro, I didn't mean— Yes, you did. Pascal's voice cut through the attempted apology like a sword. You meant every word. You've been building up to this the entire interview. This whole thing was a setup, wasn't it? Invite the immigrant actor on, make him comfortable, then remind him he's not really American. The accusation seemed to energize Kimmel's anger again. Oh, come on, you're being ridiculous. I've had hundreds of guests from all over the world. And how many of them did you tell to go back where they came from? Pascal shot back. How many of them did you question their loyalty to America? Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The realization of what he had done, what he had said on live television, was beginning to sink in. But Pascal wasn't finished. You know what the really sick part is, Jimmy? I actually respected you. I thought you were one of the good ones. I thought you understood what it meant to use your platform responsibly. The disappointment in Pascal's voice was somehow more devastating than his anger had been. It was the sound of someone realizing they had been completely wrong about another person's character. But this nuclear confrontation was about to reach its ultimate climax, and what happened next would leave everyone in the studio, and millions, watching at home, absolutely speechless. Pascal took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of every immigrant who had ever been told they didn't belong. You want to know what I think, Jimmy? I think you're a coward. I think you hide behind your jokes and your smile. But deep down, you're just another bully picking on people you think can't fight back. Kimmel's face went white. How dare you call me a coward? This is my show. I built this from nothing. Built what? Pascal's voice rose to a roar that seemed to shake the entire studio. A platform where you can attack guests and then hide behind just asking questions? A place where you can tell American citizens to go back where they came from and call it entertainment? The words hit Kimmel like physical blows. Several audience members were now openly recording with their phones, despite security's attempts to stop them. The production crew stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this historic meltdown continue. You think because you have this desk, this microphone, these cameras, that gives you the right to dehumanize people? Pascal continued, his accent growing thicker with emotion. You think your platform gives you permission to spread the same hatred that forced my family to flee their homeland? Kimmel tried to interrupt, but Pascal was beyond stopping now. No, you wanted this conversation, Jimmy. You orchestrated this whole thing, so let's finish it. Pascal walked closer until he was standing directly in front of Kimmel's desk, his hands planted firmly on the surface. My father was a doctor in Chile, a respected man who saved lives. But when Pinochet came to power, men like you, men who thought they knew better, men who decided who belonged and who didn't, they made lists. They decided my father was a threat because he treated everyone equally. The studio was dead silent. Even Kimmel seemed to realize he had unleashed something he couldn't control. They came for him in the night, Pascal continued, his voice breaking slightly. Just like they came for thousands of others. And you know what saved him? America. This country that you seem to think belongs only to people who look and sound like you. Kimmel finally found his voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. Pedro, I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Pascal slammed his hand on the desk, causing Kimmel to jump backward. You wanted to score points. You wanted to tear down someone you saw as different, as foreign, as other. Just like every bully who ever told someone they didn't belong. The cameras captured every moment as Pascal straightened up, his dignity intact despite the emotional toll. But here's what you don't understand, Jimmy. I am American. Not because I was born here, but because I chose to be here. Because I believe in what this country can be, not what cowards like you want to make it. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Pascal held up a hand to stop him. I became an American citizen because I believed in the promise of America. The idea that anyone, from anywhere, could come here and build a life, could contribute, could belong. But people like you want to take that away. You want to decide who's American enough, who's loyal enough, who deserves to have a voice. Pascal began walking toward the edge of the stage, his movements deliberate and powerful. Well, congratulations, Jimmy. You got your viral moment. You got your controversy. But you also showed everyone exactly who you really are. Kimmel finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. Pedro, wait! Don't leave like this. We can work this out. Pascal stopped and turned back one final time, his expression a mixture of sadness and disgust. Work this out? You told an American citizen to go back where they came from on national television. You questioned my loyalty to my own country. You reduced me to a stereotype and treated me like I was less than human. The audience began to murmur, some people standing as they realized they were witnessing the end of something. Pascal's voice carried across the studio with crystal clarity. There's nothing to work out, Jimmy. You've shown me exactly what you think of people like me. And more importantly, you've shown America what kind of man you really are. With that, Pedro Pascal turned and walked off the stage with his head held high, leaving behind a stunned studio and a host whose career would never recover from the next few minutes of dead air. Kimmel stood alone behind his desk, the weight of his words finally sinking in as the reality of what he had done began to dawn on him. The cameras continued rolling, capturing his shocked expression as the audience erupted in confused chatter and scattered applause for Pascal's departure. Within hours, clips of the confrontation would be viewed millions of times across socials, media platforms. Stand with Pedro began trending worldwide, while Kimmel's ratings plummeted and sponsors began pulling their advertisements. The man who had tried to diminish Pedro Pascal's voice had instead amplified it beyond anything he could have imagined. The interview that was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had become a defining moment, not just for both men involved, but for a country grappling with questions about belonging, identity, and what it truly means to be American. And in the end, it was Pascal who walked away with his dignity intact, while Kimmel was left to face the consequences of revealing his true character to the world.